Hello, good morning everyone. I am going to start my audio class. This is for 6th semester students and the paper is 6.4. The topic Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, also known as the Second Indochina War and in Vietnam as the Resistance War against America, was a conflict in Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia from 1st November 1955 to the fall of Saigon on April 1975. The Vietnam War was a long and costly war where the communist government of North Vietnam fought against South Vietnam and its prime ally America. The conflict was intensified by the ongoing Cold War between America and Soviet Union. Before going in detail about the Vietnam War, you have to know a little bit about what is Cold War because the Vietnam War was very much related to the Cold War. So what is Cold War? Cold War is a state of hostility that existed between the Soviet bloc countries and the Western powers from 1945 to 1991. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the Soviet Union and the USA and their respective allies, the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc after the World War II. Actually, it was an ideological war of the communist countries and the capitalist countries. Communist countries, it was headed by Soviet Russia, and the capitalist, it was by America, United States of America. The period is generally considered to span the 1947 Truman Doctrine to the 1991 the dissolution of Soviet Union. I shall come later about the Truman Doctrine also. Now come to the war. Firstly, it's the political condition of Vietnam before starting the war. Vietnam was under French colonial rule since the 19th century. During World War II, Japanese forces invaded Vietnam. To fight off both Japanese occupiers and French colonial administration, political leader of Vietnam, his name was Ho Chi Minh. He was inspired by Chinese and Soviet communists, formed the Viet Minh, M-I-N-H, Viet Minh, or the League for the Independence of Vietnam. Following its defeat in the World War II, Japan withdrew its forces from Vietnam, and Vietnam was living the French educated Emperor Bao Dai. So that was the condition of Vietnam. And it was an opportunity to seize power for Ho Chi Minh and his forces. They rose up and taking over the northern city of Hanoi and declaring them democratic Vietnam in the northern part of Vietnam. And Ho himself, he became the president of that region, northern Vietnam. And seeking to regain control of the regime, the French-backed Emperor Bao set up a state of Vietnam in July 1943 with the city of Saigon, its capital. It was in the South Vietnam. So now we come to know that northern Vietnam, it came under Ho Chi Minh, and southern Vietnam, it came under Bao Dai. Though it was divided, but both the sides, they wanted the same thing, a united Vietnam, while Ho and his supporters wanted a nation modeled after other communist countries, but Bao and many others wanted a Vietnam with close economic and cultural ties to the West. And they had their conflict, and it has continued. Ultimately, war started between both the sides, northern and southern Vietnam, and that was war started, conflict started, then war started between them, and a decisive victory ultimately came. Decisive battle was fought. It was known as the Dien Bien Phu. It was the decisive battle in May 1954. In that battle, France lost, and that's ended almost a century of French colonial rule in Vietnam, and Vietnam was divided along that the 17th parallel, it is the 17th north latitude, with Ho in the control of north and Bao in the control of Bao. He became the leader of South Vietnam. And in 1955, however, one strongly anti-communist, his name was Ngo Diem. So he overthrown Bao, and he became the president of the government of the Republic of Vietnam. It was in South Vietnam. So after overthrowing Bao, so Diem, he became the president of the southern part of Vietnam. So thus it is the formal division of northern and southern Vietnam it was. Then come to a very important point, important aspect of the Vietnam crisis. It was the Viet Cong. So what is Viet Cong? After the French quit Vietnam in 1954, the American assumed the financial and military support for the South Vietnamese. The Viet Cong, also known as the National Liberation Front, a South Vietnamese common front under the direction of North Vietnam. So it was a South Vietnamese organization, but it was directed by North Vietnam or by Ho Chi Minh. They initiated a guerrilla war in South Vietnam. And North Vietnam, during that time, North Vietnam also invaded Laos, supported by Russia and China. So thus the conflict between southern and northern Vietnam again started in South Vietnam, and the Viet Cong, they started the guerrilla war. Then come to another important point, that how America had involved in the war, how America had entered in the war. With the Cold War intensifying, already Cold War started intensifying worldwide, America hardened its policies against any allies of the Soviet Union, and in 1955, American President D. Eisenhower had pleaded his firm support to Diem and the South Vietnam. So why America had entered the war? There are some reasons. The main reason the United States got involved in Vietnam War was the purpose of doing everything possible to keep communism from spreading around the world. Since the beginning of Cold War, the United States had practiced a policy of containment against the expansion of communism. This containment policy, often referred to as the Truman Doctrine, since American President Harry S. Truman argued that USA should actively support the containment of Soviet communism in years immediately after World War II. The reason of American involvement in Vietnam War are a part of the Domino Theory. Now come to what is Domino Theory. Domino Theory was a Cold War belief popular within USA from 1950 to the end of the Cold War, based on the Truman Doctrine. The theory held the idea that if Soviet communist was able to spread into a single country, then it had the potential to spread all of the other surrounding countries. If Soviet communist was able to spread into a single country, then it had the potential to spread all of the other surrounding countries. So, Americans needed to prevent the first domino from falling, country turning to communism, from falling in order to prevent the spread of communism. So, this is the Domino Theory. So, this theory America had applied in case of Vietnam War, and before that it was in case of Korean War also this theory was applied, and they had entered the Korean War by this reason. And here using this theory, following this theory, America had entered in the war. And what happened? So that America had sent their trained armies, militaries, and with training and equipment from America, Diem, that the South Vietnam president, he cracked down in the Viet Minh sympathizer in the south, and the Viet Cong, and that the southern Vietnam government, Diem's government, so arresting some 1 lakh Viet Cong people whom were brutally tortured and executed. So that was happened. After that, it was in 1957, the Viet Cong and other opponents of Diem's regimes, oppressive regime, they began fighting back with attack of the government officials and other targets. And by 1959, they had begun engaging the South Vietnamese armies in fire fights. So that it was by the Viet Cong. They had begun engaging the South Vietnamese army in firefights. So it was a prolonged war. It was continued. The war continued. It was continued up to 1973, and for 19 years. After going, the war was going for 19 years, and after that America was exhausted with this long war. And on 27 January 1973, American President, so Nixon, he signed the Paris Peace Accord, which ended the direct American involvement in the Vietnam War. So America left, and the North Vietnamese, they accepted the ceasefire. But as American troops depart Vietnam, the peace accord was broken immediately, and fighting continued for 2 years, and ultimately in 17 April 1975, Saigon was captured, and on 30th April 1975, North and South Vietnam was united. Thus, that the long and the costliest war of the world, it came to an end. So, although it came to an end after 19 years, but it had the huge casualties, left huge casualties. Lots of the people dies. It was the loss of men, money, everything. And the American military, they has estimated that between 2 lakhs to 2,50,000 Vietnamese soldiers died in the war, and about 58,000 American army men were died or missing in the war. So that was the casualty, and thus the war came to an end after the unification of Vietnam. So this is about the Vietnam War. I think you have an idea about the causes, about the background, about the causes of the Vietnam War, about Viet Cong, American involvement in the war, and also about what is Cold War. You get an idea, or the Domino Theory, Truman's doctrine. All these things you have an idea by this discussion. Okay, I think I can conclude here. That's all. Thank you.